It's the Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. Happy Election Day. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. Today on the show, a lot of Michigan kids are participating in the state program that provides free school meals. But it's still hard to quantify the need.
We'll discuss what food insecurity looks like for local families, and we'll challenge some common myths about food insecurity that persist in Detroit.
Also, the election is top of mind for many of us as voters head to the polls today. We'll unpack some of the anxieties surrounding this election season with a clinical psychologist. She researches stress and resilience.
But that stress and anxiety isn't stopping people from going to the polls today, Robin. The Metro spoke with some of those voters today.
You mind if I ask you real quick why you're here?
Just want to make my vote count. I'm pretty heavy in the community, so just to kind of see what the city votes were about. Just want to be a part of it,
Yeah.
Make a difference.
Cool.
Yeah, yes or no, or,
Thanks.
win or lose. So at least I'm involved. Ryan Wyson from Dearborn.
Really, it's that our vote is what gives us our voice, and even if you don't vote for every single category on the ballot, your voice still matters. Maysam Ali Bazzi, Dearborn.
I love hearing from voters on Election Day. Tia, did you vote early, or, I must ask, are you hitting the polls today?
I am burning rubber out of here after the show today to make sure I make it to the polls. I know I'm going to make it in time, but I want to make sure I make it to the polls. It feels really special to vote in person. I like picking up my sticker this year, especially this year, and it feels important. I think about my ancestors. Once again, my grandma voted for the first time in her 30s. So just having that in my mind, the back of my mind, especially when election season rolls around, it's very important to do my part. So that's why I do it. And I will be doing it later today.
That's real, Tia. It's both a ritual and a responsibility for you, and you don't take it lightly.
No.
Now, let's understand what's been happening in the WDET newsroom this election season and how reporters have been working to bring you the info you need to make informed decisions. And at a time, we should point out when there's a lot of confusion and misinformation surrounding the candidates and the issues.
That is right, Robin. We have the conductor of it all, the glue of WDET's newsmaking. The antidote to misinformation. That is Jerome Vaughn, WDET's news director. He is joining us right now in studio. Jerome, thanks for sitting down with us during this very busy time.
Glad to be with you anytime.
Awesome. So, Jerome, you've seen a lot of elections while overseeing WDET's newsroom. What's been different about this particular election cycle?
Wow. So much has been different. We've, over the past couple of elections, see things change. The tone and the tenor that the candidates use to describe themselves and describe their opponents has changed dramatically. We've been through January 6th, 2021, where there was an attack on the Capitol in the aftermath of the 2020 presidential election. And so a lot of things are up in the air. A lot of norms have been broken in the past couple of elections that throughout this election, you couldn't be sure that this was going to happen because it always happened, or you couldn't be sure that that was going to happen because it always happened. And so in a lot of ways, this was really a very new election.
And just hearing that from someone who has so much experience working in journalism, working in news, working with election coverage in general, hearing you say that makes me think about the young journalists who are entering the newsroom and thinking about the things that they're learning and picking up on today as well. But before we get to the young journalists, I think about how you're preparing for such a new experience for yourself and the newsroom.
Well, yeah, we're preparing as much as we can. Let's say 12 years ago, 20 years ago, you had a really specific expectation of what election day and election night was going to be like, how it was going to go, and, what time this was going to happen and what time the votes were going to be done being counted, with a few exceptions. now all of that is up in the air, right? I mean, there are concerns at voting places about possible violence. Let me just tell you a short story from this morning. So I went with my wife and some of my kids to go vote this morning. I was really happy because several of my kids, this was their first time voting.
Awesome.
And so I've put my ballot in. I was the first one finished, and I'm standing over on the side, and someone comes and approaches me and do you need any help? Are you good? I'm like, oh, I'm just here, waiting for my my daughters to finish. They're like, okay, but a few elections ago you wouldn't have gotten approached that way, right? So the poll workers are looking for possibility of problems and head them off gently and very politely, but they are keeping their eyes open for things about that, which 12 years ago wasn't the case.
They're on high alert.
Yeah, I was going to say, trying to keep order before anything could possibly happen or anything like that, which is relief to hear that there is actual monitoring happening at the polls this time around.
Indeed, it makes me think about the poll workers too, though, and just the immense responsibility and stress that they're probably feeling today.
Which is new as well,
right? There are a lot of newer, younger election poll workers. I remember, back in the day, most of the poll workers were retirees who, I'd see election after election after election in my precinct. And they're not there anymore. Now, we know that, some of them are older, some of them we lost to COVID, but there's a younger generation that, believes in the importance of making sure that, the vote counting is going right and the polls are taken care of. And so there are, middle-aged people there who are working the polls, at least in my precinct today, and they're very excited to be there. I talk with them a little bit, and they're,
I mean, speaking of the younger generations, though, what was it like for your kids to vote for the first time, Jerome?
They were excited, right? They they did their research. They knew who they wanted to vote for, and my wife and I were finishing up some stuff, and they're like, "Come on, Mom, Dad, come on, we're ready to go. Let's go." And so we walked over together, and I finished, and I was so happy that I was just able to watch them cast their first votes. It was really exciting for me.
I love that so much. The Vaughn clan was there voting together as a family unit. But speaking of young voters and speaking of young people in general, I'm thinking about past elections. My memory working on a 2016 election here at WDET, all-nighter. Didn't leave until 5 a.m. So in what way are you preparing our young journalists, our interns here at WDET for this particular election, especially because it's such a new experience for so many people?
Well, we're teaching them how to drink coffee and eat pizza. We are sending some of our interns are going out to cover some different candidates in their election headquarters. Some of our interns will be in here in the station with us as we are compiling our digital election results, which are going to be online tonight. And they are part of our team, which, takes everybody to bring everyone this information about how different folks are voting and, what the election results are and, what's going on throughout the night. I mean, for us, we're starting at 8 p.m. We'll have NPR special coverage of what's going on around the country. Russ McNamara will be on air throughout the night, bringing Metro Detroiters updated information on what's going on around here. And, we'll have several reporters out and about phoning in the information from whichever headquarters they are at. The NPR election coverage goes until 3 p.m., but we don't get to go home. We're here. Pat Batcher will come in about 2 a.m., and we'll get him all set up. He starts at 5 a.m. on the air. So there's a lot going on tonight.
The conductor of it all. Ooh, I mean, U.S. politics, election coverage, it continues to change, right? Every cycle with opinions and outrage seemingly everywhere, including on television and the internet. There's so many more media outlets and commentators than there once were back in the days of the 3 network channels. When was that? It hasn't been since what, the 70s, 80s? Well,
back in the 80s. I remember.
You weren't born yet.
No.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for that. Things have changed a lot, right? And there are a lot more sources of information. What we're doing here is we're providing the information on the radio, because that's what we are. We're public radio, but also we're providing the information on digital channels. So we'll have information on our website, as well as, Facebook and on X and on, Instagram through the night, so that people are getting the information where they are. And that's very important.
So talk a little bit more about that, Jerome, about how WDET as a newsroom approaches election coverage in a different way than perhaps some other outlets that highlight their commentators and are highlighting opinions. And we know that this is a more fractured, sometimes unreliable media landscape. So in addition to just being very consistent and putting out that information on all the different channels, as you just mentioned, what does that look like to cut through the noise for people?
For us, it's really important to first and foremost be factual, right? We're here to tell folks what is going on. We're here to tell folks how things are happening and why things are happening the way they are. We're not here to take sides. That's very important in the way that we talk about what's going on. That's something that's really important. And I think that's one of the things that many of us journalists in the newsroom take issue with, is when certain media organizations say, hey, so-and-so should win or so-and-so should win, and we're here behind candidate X or we're here behind candidate Y. That's fine, sort of, I'm an old-fashioned guy in a newspaper editorial, but to have your whole network, your whole broadcast system set up in that direction, I think it does a disservice to the voters. The voters are the ones who make a difference. The voters are the ones who make the decision. And we're here to provide the information for them so that they can make up their own minds and they can cast their own ballot in the voting booth.
Just the facts.
Just the facts. You're listening to The Metro on WDET. I'm Tia Graham with Robin Vincent. We're talking with WDET's news director, Jerome Vaughn. So in addition to the presidential race, what are some of the key races you and WDET and the team are tracking tonight and tomorrow, as well as the rest of the week?
Wow, there's a lot. Of course, a lot is going on. We're watching the coverage from around the country to see how the presidential race is going to go, because that's going to affect us in Metro Detroit in so many ways. On a more Michigan local basis, we're watching the U.S. Senate race between Alyssa Slotkin and Mike Rogers. That has tightened up in the past few days, and so we're really waiting to see how that's going to go. We're watching all the congressional races, especially the 10th congressional race, John James and Carl Marlinga. That's one that we're watching really very closely. And then there's a lot of really local things. There's some millages going on. There's, Prop S here in Detroit. There's the public school board in Detroit, Highland Park schools, and, the university boards of governors or boards of regents. So there's a lot that we're keeping an eye on tonight.
Jerome, yes, speaking of things that you'll be keeping an eye on, we can't have this conversation without acknowledging election safety and security, which I realize you did mention previously. We haven't forgotten about the Stop the Steal chaos, the Capitol insurrection circa the last presidential election. What's a red flag that something is going wrong at the polls or after the fact that you're talking to your team about?
Wow. So we're keeping our eyes out for problems at polling locations. If people are not being allowed to vote at a location, that's something we'll want to look into. If a designated polling place is closed for one reason or another, we're going to look into that. And, God forbid, but if there are, scuffles that develop in polling places, those are things we want to keep an eye on as well. As far as tonight, we will have a reporter, Brianna Tinsley, will be down at Huntington Place where they're counting the votes along with some folks from the state network. So we'll be watching that as well. Quinn Kleinfelter did a great piece last week about election security. They have changed where in the building they are counting the votes. They are not letting just anybody in to watch that go on.
Right.
There will be a police presence there to ensure that everything goes okay. And so we're just watching to see how that goes. I mean, let's be blunt about it. Back in 2020, we didn't expect any of the things to happen that happened down at then TCF Center, now Huntington Place.
Right.
We reacted quickly. We got folks down there and covered what was going on. But, we're hoping that we know that the city is more prepared than it was 4 years ago. And so we're hoping that, it's an uneventful night down there.
One other thing that has me thinking of, if you could sum it up quickly, what was going through your mind when you learned about what was happening at what is now called Huntington Place during that last election with the Stop the Steal protesters, some who were armed and making quite the kerfuffle?
I'll be blunt about it. I mean, I was surprised that folks were so bold about it. I was not surprised that people were thinking that way, but that they were taking action in that way was stunning to me. And, them banging on the glass, folks intimidating the poll workers. I was angry about it because we have had a fairly orderly way of getting votes counted, and I like it that way.
Jerome Vaughn is WDET's news director. Thank you for your leadership at WDET Newsroom and for taking a few minutes to join us on the Metro, Jerome.
Glad to be with you anytime.
Tonight, you can listen to WDET and NPR Live special coverage at 8 p.m. and track results at WDET.org. From the WDET newsroom, the polls are open on this election day in Metro Detroit. State election officials say more than 3 million people have already voted by mail or in person. The polls close at 8 p.m. tonight. You can register to vote today at your clerk's office.
South Korea's privacy watchdog has fined Meta more than $15 million for illegally collecting personal information from Facebook users. That includes data about their political views and sexual orientation and sharing it with thousands of advertisers. Not cool at all. Coming up, how prepared are election officials for potential security challenges at the polls? We'll learn how they're prepping coming up next.
While you're here, you chose to come and vote. You could have stayed home and you didn't. What brings you here to vote today?
It's election day. It's time to get out, express your opinion on what you think of the candidates. Bill Junker, living here in Dearborn.
I chose to vote because Michigan is a swing state, and I knew that I wanted to make sure that I got my vote in and it counted. But even if I didn't live in a swing state, I would vote because it's important to contribute to what's happening in the U.S. and to think about what's on the table here. My name is Megan Sergott, and I live in Detroit, Michigan.
So great to hear voters today on this election day, what has brought them out to the polls. Welcome back to the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. Michigan is among the 47 states with early in-person voting in this presidential election. According to Michigan's voting dashboard, over 3.2 million people have cast early ballots in person or by mail.
That's nearly 46% of the registered voters in the state. Recently, WDET's Stephen Henderson spoke with Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson about this year's early voter turnout.
They spoke about how the state has been preparing to count ballots and any possible security challenges early in-person voting has brought.
We have been preparing and working with local, state, federal partners to ensure the security and safety of our election. And so we're not aware of any specific threats, but we're being very serious about the potential for political violence and making it clear that any kind is unacceptable. It won't be tolerated. And we hope that everyone will just respect what Election Day, or really the last day of voting in this year's scenario, should be, which is a celebratory day, a day where we're proud about what we get to do as Americans and as Michiganders. And if anyone hasn't voted yet, that they can get out and vote in a smooth and easy, convenient way. And then we'll all sit back as the clerks do their jobs and count all those ballots. And we hope we'll have the results not too long into the week.
Yeah. So I do want to talk about some of the threats and security and things like that. But I also want to go back a little bit here, because we've been doing something over the last few weeks here in Michigan that we haven't done before, and that's the early voting that has been taking place. I want to talk about that voting and have you talk a little about how the potential threats to elections and interference and security have played out over that period of time, because I think that is somewhat informative of what we might be looking at on Election Day itself. So let's talk about early voting, how that's gone, and what kinds of things you have seen and can take away from the way that we've held that part of the election.
We just finished about 9 days of early voting, longer in Detroit, in Canton Township, and East Lansing, which started earlier. And first, what we saw was really just extraordinary. Almost or over 1.2 million citizens in Michigan voted early and in person at an early voting center. And it was quite extraordinary because in the past two elections that we had early voting in person, which was the August primary and the February primary, only about 75,000 people overall in that election used that option. And so we were really concerned going into this election that citizens didn't know about this option and perhaps wouldn't take advantage of it in large numbers. And boy, did Michigan voters prove us wrong. They really embraced this option and showed a lot of enthusiasm in using it. It was every early voting site I went to, especially yesterday, which was our highest turnout day for early voting. We saw lines all across the state. And typically lines at an election day is something to be worried about. But because the clock wasn't ticking, you could always leave and come back the next day. It was more just like people were happy to stand in line and be a part of history and be a part of early voting for the first time in our state in a presidential election. So it went really well. I'm really proud of all the clerks for stepping up and the poll workers who came out and for all the voters who took advantage of this option for the first time to vote.
Yeah, and how much of the specter of disruption, which I think we all kind of live with constantly now with regard to elections, how much of that was present during early voting? Were there instances where people had to intervene to stop disruptions for people who just wanted to cast their ballots?
We were on the ground all throughout the state, our team, the Attorney General's team, to be prepared to mitigate or de-escalate a situation would it occur. But no, the vast majority, if not all of what we saw was people really enjoying being able to vote on a Saturday or a Sunday or a Tuesday after work or a Wednesday or Thursday with their kids. Frankly, the two biggest patterns I saw visiting the early voting places were, one, a lot of new voters, a lot of people who had been registered but hadn't voted before or in recent elections. And so that was really great to see. And a couple of folks said every time a new voter showed up, they got a special sticker and they would run out of stickers. And then the second thing I saw were a lot of kids, a lot of parents bringing their kids to watch them vote and, think about their role inheriting the process in the future. And that was really great, too. The Romulus clerk told me yesterday, we call early voting the family style because you just see parents really making a day out of it and bringing their kids and showing them how important it is to vote. So it's really great to see all around what the state does when we have a week of voting instead of a day. And, people showed up and they and people who might not otherwise have voted showed up to vote.
Yeah. So since we began this kind of journey into reforming the election process and really kind of opening it up, I think is the right way to describe the things that Michigan voters have embraced in the way of change. One thing that we've seen is an increase in voting. And of course, that was the point, that turnout has been going up. I want to get your sense of what early voting this year tells us about potential turnout for 2024 and whether that trend, which again has been pretty steady since we started adopting these reforms, whether that is expected to continue.
Yeah, it is. This year we've already seen more than 3.2 million Michigan voters cast their ballot. So that's 44% turnout where we're already at. And that actually tracks very closely to 2020, which was our highest turnout election in state's history. And it was also the first election where we saw no reason voting by mail. And we saw a number of citizens take advantage of that before Election Day. Of course, that was also in the midst of the pandemic. But in 2020, we went into Election Day with about 3.3 million total mail ballots having been cast. And we're right at that number now. And so we'll see what happens on Election Day. But I think the number, frankly, that's the most interesting to me, that really shows how enthusiastic people are, how eager people are to vote this year, is that over 82% of the ballots that have been requested by mail have been returned already. Wow. And that is twice the number of what we usually see. We're usually at like 40, at best 50% return at this point. Most come in on Election Day. And so to see the vast majority already in is a great thing. Of course, it means those clerks, for the most part around the state, can begin processing them now and not on Election Day. So it's one of the best sort of granular signs I'm seeing in terms of voter enthusiasm and engagement, and also our ability to handle the high volume.
Can you explain for listeners what changed between 2020 and now in terms of what you're allowed to do before Election Day that makes it easier to start the counting earlier after the polls close?
Yeah, the two biggest things that have changed since 2020 are, importantly, the law, which now allows clerks to begin pre-processing and putting ballots into machines to be tabulated during the early voting period. So that process began last Monday, the 28th, as opposed to Tuesday, November 5th, which is when it began in 2020. So you've got a whole week in which that work has been done in Detroit in places. And with transparency, there have been observers watching the process as well, and challengers too present in those places. And the second thing that's changed is that 82% of folks have already got their ballots back in and are going through that process. And in 2020, we got the bulk of them on Election Day as opposed to before Election Day. And so we're in a better position to more efficiently pre-process and tabulate those ballots, those 2 million ballots that are coming in through the mail or at drop boxes, and that's a good thing. However, there will still be procrastinators. You can return your ballot up until 8 p.m. On Tuesday. We encourage you to do it sooner, but if people wait until the last minute, your ballot will still count. It will just be part of that last batch that gets processed and fed into machines before the unofficial results are announced.
That was Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson speaking with Stephen Henderson on Created Equal yesterday. Polls are open now. They close at 8 p.m. this evening. Don't forget to vote.
Coming up, many of us are working through election anxiety. We'll learn some strategies for managing that ongoing stress. You stay right there.
What made you come out today? Why are you here?
I always do it. I've been doing it for 40 years.
Okay.
Come out on the day of.
Not early.
Not early. I go to the Dearborn gym that has the early voting on it. It's just more traditional. The interesting thing is what young people do. Do your homework. You do it when you're in college. You do it everywhere else. Why don't you study what somebody does say or doesn't say? Find out, what you want to do. But don't let anybody else tell you what to do. Tom Myrna from Dearborn, Michigan.
Voter voices from the polls today. Happy Election Day and welcome back to the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. Election Day is here, and for many people, this election cycle has been particularly difficult to navigate. From the onslaught of texts and commercials to the nonstop, inescapable political conversations, people are looking for ways to decompress. This may shape up to be a stressful week, and we say week because there's a high chance the presidential election will not be called tonight. This uncertainty made us think of a recent episode with WDET's Stephen Henderson on Created Equal about election-related stress. He spoke with Aras Javanbakht, a psychiatrist and director of the Stress, Trauma, and Anxiety Research Clinic at Wayne State University, and Rita Walker, a clinical psychologist and co-author of Calm in Chaos, a quick relief guide for managing anxiety and overwhelm in loud and uncertain times. Stephen started the conversation by asking Dr. Walker about this election and why this moment is making people so tense.
What is it about this election that people find difficult to manage?
I'm so glad that we're having this conversation because for a lot of people, they may not even realize how much the election is stressing them out. They may not realize that day-to-day life is still going. We still have responsibilities for, children, for parents, at work. Some folks have financial stress. There are folks in North Carolina who are dealing with recovery. Like there is so much that's happening in our society. And then we're adding on top of it being potentially inundated, with ads. Being in Michigan, in a swing state, which is new for me as someone who just moved to Michigan, being inundated.
Welcome to the battleground.
Thank you so much. And I've been in the South for much of my life in a place where, we don't have as much of the ads and as much of the vitriol, to be honest. And so it is a bit different.
It's
and so
different.
I am noticing the difference. And that's one of the things that I will always say to individuals. And that is when you recognize that there is something different about how you're able to respond to what's happening in your world. So maybe, you're getting short with coworkers or, with children, you have less patience or, waking up in the middle of the night and not able to sleep as well. And recognizing that something has shifted and maybe that person is saying things to themselves like, oh my goodness, this election is going to change my life on Wednesday. And so I need to be sure that I'm ready for that. But what am I doing to get ready for this shift? And so for me as a clinical psychologist, I think about what are the things that we are in fact telling ourselves about what this election means for our lives, for that of our families, and our capacity to just be able to thrive day to day.
Yeah. So Dr. Walker, tell me how stressed you are. You moved here and are experiencing something for the first time in terms of, the way that elections play out here. Is it getting to you?
That was a really astute observation because I have had to be more intentional with giving my own self grace. I lived in Texas for 12 years. And I have had my own just sadness over the last few months, to be honest, because grief is about loss. It's not always about losing someone, but it is about loss. And so this adjustment, leaving my grocery store, my church, my friends, like all of that has been a lot for me. And I'll tell you, it was just yesterday. I was taking my son to a basketball practice that I've taken him to, for the several months now. And I missed the turn twice. My husband is out of town. So that's why I happen to be taking my son on this particular day. And I found out that, of course, my son texted my husband and say, Mom missed the turn twice. But what I had to say to myself was, wait a minute, what's going on? And being honest, like I said, the loss of having moved, I've had several folks to reach out to me because of, election related stress.
Yeah.
I have a pretty big deadline tomorrow. And so it's been a lot. And so what I said to myself last night was, well, whatever work I thought I was getting done last night is not happening. We're going to bed and I'm going to rest and reset, because while it might seem like a small thing, missing a turn, going to a place that I'm accustomed to going to, but somehow something happened and I didn't, a couple streets down. I was able to turn around and get him to where he needed to be on time. But that signaled to me that I might need to reset and do some things differently.
Wow. Dr. Javenbach, same question. What is it about what's going on now that makes us more stressed than we normally would be in anticipation of an election? And what are some of the fears that you hear from people about what's going on?
So Dr. Walker, she talked about losses. And I think the focus of both the political parties and the media outlets attached to them or related to them has been. So when you are in a situation of election, you would normally expect a lot of excitement about your side winning and some concern about the other side winning. And historically, there's been about, okay, we both care about our country. We have differences in our opinion. We have differences about strategies of how things should work. But now when you listen to both sides of the argument, more than what you hear about how we should be excited about if we won is how we should be terrified. Not even be concerned or afraid, be terrified about the other side. And I talk a lot in my book, actually the title is Afraid, about the same issue in the realm of the politics and I think part of the reason is that the system has become so competitive that we have learned that emotions sell. When my emotions are attracted, I will scroll and tap and watch and listen, sit there and donate. And the more negative the emotions, the more focused I will be there. If threat is relate to me, then all my attention will be there. And that is one reason this has become disproportional in people's lives, meaning that we are terrified and nervous about the result of the election as much as if we were in one of these campaigns thinking about a position in the government. I'm a regular citizen, and the most I can do is vote or pick up my phone and call some people, right? But now it has become an existential threat, existential issue for us. And I think as a result of, and we have talked about this before, this forceful instigation of fear in us, we have got to the point that half of America believes the other half are either stupid or evil.
Sure.
We have never been here. It's we were talking with some friends the other day about now we are starting to see even less yard signs. And part of it could be, we can talk about election exhaustion and the burnout later, but part could also be because we are terrified of each other. I'm afraid if I have this post and my neighbors from the other side, they will hate me. They will stop talking to me. We have never been here where something that should be a small percentage of my identity, it's a disagreement between you and I. You and I have so many different aspects to our being that we can share as Americans with each other. And one part is my political perspective. That has been exaggerated to the point that this is a make or break thing.
Yeah.
And if we win, the world will be heaven. And if we lose, the world will be a hell.
That was WDET's Stephen Henderson speaking with Arash Javenbach and Rita Walker from Wayne State University. Dr. Walker will join the Metro later this week to chat about post-election feelings. Coming up, why are we losing more grocery stores in the city of Detroit despite more people moving into the city? We'll get some answers next. Stay right there. Welcome back to the Metro on WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. Food insecurity. It's pretty hard to quantify. It means pinpointing who exactly has access to nutritious food. And there are some common misperceptions about it in Detroit that persist. Meanwhile, we know programs that offer free food, like the universal school meals now provided to students in Michigan, are getting a lot of use. The number of students eating breakfast at school jumped 26% last school year. That's according to the Michigan Department of Education. Research suggests programs like universal school meals are highly effective. Students perform better academically, and they experience improved well-being. And providing meals to all kids, researchers say, wipes away the stigma. But what about when we zoom out and look at people of different ages experiencing food insecurity? What exactly does the lived experience of food insecurity look like right now? And how can more people get access to healthy, nutritious meals? Alex Hill asks these questions in his work. He's a researcher at Wayne State who focuses on health disparities, food politics, and medical anthropology. Alex, welcome to the Metro.
Thanks so much for having me, Robin.
So first, Alex, let's peel back some of the history of trying to address food insecurity in Detroit. There was a task force dating back to, the 1970s working on this. What did that entail?
Yeah, in the 1970s, it was a Wayne County task force that found, some 70,000 Detroiters were malnourished and facing a food insecure situation. And that really, I think, it came on the heels of the 1967 rebellion, where there was a lot of kind of turmoil. And the one thing that I always try to talk about is the access to opportunity. And we know that was a big kind of impetus for the 67 rebellion, and grocery stores are really kind of at the center of that, both in providing foods and opportunity to Black Detroiters, but then also in their discriminatory hiring practices. So, right before the rebellion, there was widespread boycotts of both Kroger and A&P because both of those chains refused to hire Black workers.
Some really important historical context and the reverberations of which we're still feeling today. But we do need to fast forward to 2024, and there have been some strides that have been made in the city to address food insecurity. Talk about those.
Right, absolutely. So I author the Detroit Food Metrics Report for the Detroit Food Policy Council, and we're tracking 12 key metrics every year on Detroit's food system. So if you want to know the best numbers, go check out that report. And what we're seeing is chain grocers have come back to the city. We have 3 different Meijer locations. Whole Foods came back. And there have been a handful of new independent grocery stores, but we're still losing more. We focus on full-line grocery stores, where you can do all of your shopping in all the food categories. So we're still losing more than we're gaining. And if you drill down, it highlights in specific areas of the city that are losing that opportunity and that choice. For where they purchase their food.
Alex, that has cascading effects because it not only affects a person's access, it also diminishes a neighborhood and makes it a less desirable place for someone to want to live. So why are we losing more grocers even as we're seeing the city's population rise? Yeah,
it's a multifaceted problem. It's difficult to run a grocery store. It's a tough business to be in. Margins are really thin. And in Detroit, since it is I think we have, just 4 chain grocery stores. All of the others are independent and family run. And in a lot of cases, the new generation isn't interested in running a grocery store. And so I know that's caused a number of these independent stores to close. And then, just besides the economics of running a grocery store and being profitable. But I will say one thing really positive that we have started to see is a lot more our small scale food retail spots. So like neighborhood grocery on the city's east side, and there have been a handful of other kind of smaller concept but healthy food retail focused locations. And I know, a part of that is the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation has their Green Grocer project that just recently got a new round of funding and is really kind of focusing on some of these smaller scale. So that is a big positive that we're starting to see more. But the loss of the full line grocery stores is really kind of alarming.
Yeah. I mean, so the smaller shops are filling in the gaps in some ways. You're listening to The Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent alongside Tia Graham. We're speaking with Wayne State researcher Alex Hill about food insecurity in Detroit, what we know, and the question marks that remain. Now, Alex, I mentioned at the top that there are some misperceptions about food insecurity in Detroit. And I know you worked on some research a few years ago that really dispelled some of those common myths. Could you tell us about those?
Yeah, absolutely. Worked with the Henry Ford Health researchers looking at some of their patient population, both comparing food insecure patients and those who self-identified as not food insecure, and really looked at what opportunities they had, what pathways they were using to purchase food and to put food on the table. And broadly across the board, I think there's the assumption that food insecure folks are kind of trapped in their geographic location. They're limited to what is right next to them. And we found that's not the case at all. Many times, you could live in an area with a lot of grocery stores, but you might still prefer to shop somewhere else outside of your neighborhood. And I think that, no matter what your income is, you still like to have choice. And you have preferences in where you are shopping and procuring food.
Sure. So, okay, what would you say then to addressing some of these obstacles then and improving the options for people? What did your research ultimately point to as solutions?
Yeah, well, I think the research pointed to we have a lot more questions to answer. But, I do think, Detroit is one of many large cities that, we don't have a healthy food retail strategy as a city. The most we have is the Green Grocer project from the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation. But other cities have these very kind of broad strategies that use multiple different, tax incentives or opportunities for people to open grocery stores or to focus on providing healthy food retail in areas of the city that are losing it. And I think, now's a great time for us to put that strategy together.
Thank you for highlighting not just the problem, but some of the solutions. Alex Hill researches food politics at Wayne State University. Alex, thanks for joining the Metro.
Thanks for having me.
That's the Metro for Tuesday, November 5th, Election Day. The show is produced by Sam Corey, David Lyons, and Jack Philbrandt, with additional support from Dorothy Jones. Our engineer is Nate Bender. Music by Sam Bobian and Will Sessions.
You can listen to recent episodes online at WDET.org and make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform. The show is also on YouTube if you like listening that way.
The Metro is a production of WDET, a listener-supported service of Wayne State University. If you like what you hear and you want to support the Metro, consider becoming a member at WDET.org/donate.
This is WDET FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. Thanks for listening.
Talk to you tomorrow.